It is my privilege to announce our next keynote. Naomi Moran is a Nungbal, Arakul and Dungati woman from New South Wales. She's General Manager of Australia's only independent Indigenous newspaper, the Koori Mail, which is very, very different from the Courier Mail. And she's chairperson of First Nations Media Australia, the peak body for Indigenous media. She joined the Koori Mail when she was just 14 and worked across a range of roles within that newspaper, leaving to join NITV, which is the only Indigenous TV station. She then went on to explore working in radio, working in a joint role with both the Brisbane Indigenous Media Association and National Indigenous Radio Service, and then she returned to Koori Mail as General Manager. She's got a passion for developing and delivering in-school programs and mentoring students, particularly Indigenous youth, with employment and career pathways, particularly in northern New South Wales. She's recently led a community response on the Bundjalung Country in Lismore to support recovery and relief efforts during the floods. And the Koori Mail won the inaugural National NAIDOC Innovation Award for their work. Please welcome Naomi.
Thank you. Just bear with me while I pop these down. And I hope you don't mind, but I'm actually going to take my shoes off. Not because I'm nervous and my feet are sweating. No, it couldn't be that reason. But because if I'm ever invited to speak, there's method to the madness. I like to feel truly present in the moment and grounded in my conversation with you all today. So I wouldn't be offended if anybody else took their shoes off. I'm just choosing to leave mine over here to save the panel over there because I don't know what state these toes are in these days. Jingiwala, everyone, and good afternoon. Thank you for inviting me to share with you today, and I use that word a lot throughout my presentations because I truly believe that the opportunity to share is really special. I acknowledge the traditional custodians of these lands, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, their descendants who are still here with us today, and acknowledge and honour the ancestors and those who have come before us. I acknowledge the communities and the generations from this country that will continue to contribute to the rightful place of our people, our culture and our histories for many generations to come. I'd also like to acknowledge my fellow Aboriginal and or Torres Strait Islander brothers and sisters who are here today, and it's so nice to see Michelle from up home here doing incredible work with Nanyajajum. I'd also like to acknowledge anybody here today who is part of the LGBTQI community, transgender, genderqueer and non-binary, and acknowledge that you are in a safe space here with me today, and I very much welcome you to be here with us today. I want to express that at any time, any one person throughout my sharing today feels triggered or is personally sensitive to anything that I might share with you, should you need to leave the room and take some time out, I am totally okay with that, and I speak here today with respect and understanding of that. I'm so appreciative of the invitation to share with you today and thank NCOS for inviting me to be here, and I want to acknowledge the incredible work that you're all doing in your sector. And I'm sorry that I don't have a big PowerPoint presentation. As you can imagine, the past 8 months have been interesting to say the least, and I think I'm just lucky I got on the plane today and figured out that it was in fact Monday. My name is Naomi Moran. I am a proud Bundjalung woman from the Nungbal and Arakul peoples of Cabbage Tree Island in the Byron Bay region, and also have a strong connection to the Dungati Nation of Southwest Rocks on the mid-north coast. When we see people in their leadership, outside of their roles, we may not know a lot about their story, who they are, where they come from, and what makes them do the work that they do, and how they've been shaped by their experiences in life to do that work. To know someone is to understand someone and to understand how they see themselves in this world. And for me, how I see myself in this world is very much part of my personal story, which greatly impacts the work that I do. So today, I'm here as a genuine person, vulnerable in my story, sharing who I am, where I come from, and everything in between, with the intent that perhaps even just 1% of what I share today And my experiences in my work and in my community make you feel something, make you want to act, perhaps enlightens you, encourages you, and makes you want to celebrate who you are in the sector that you're in, and two, to honour the work that you do. To be here in this space with you all is very special, and I hope that my sharing today will resonate with you all in some way, and two, make way for us all to stay connected long after this gathering. Look, anyone who knows me, and I'm looking at Michelle because maybe she knows me this well, knows that I always have a story to tell. And oftentimes I say that there is great risk and reward when you give a black woman a microphone because she's got a lot to say. I'm the General Manager of the Koori Mail, Australia's national independent Indigenous newspaper, based proudly on the Widjabul lands of Lismore, Chair of First Nations Media Australia, a Director on Arts Northern Rivers, and also a recently appointed Director of the Board for the Community Legal Centre of Northern Rivers. I'm a proud mother of two. I have a beautiful little boy who's 3 years old going on 13, and the teenager stage is very real. So if anybody has got any hot tips before I leave today, please share with me in return. And I have a beautiful stepdaughter who's 9 years old and in our full-time care now. I'm so incredibly passionate about community. I'm a die-hard Whitney Houston fan. And every time I come to Sydney, I'm reminded of this when I lived here and religiously went to the karaoke over at the Rails in Redfern. So much so that I was once banned because, quote unquote, maybe we should let somebody else have a turn. So I'm here with you all today, and I promise to provide this light and shade because, you know, it can't always be deep and doom and gloom. We have to have fun and truly get to know one another. So I come here today, I guess, as an advocate for the voice, for your voice, for my voice, for the voices of our communities, and also the voices of those who had their voices taken from them and were never heard. And this is very much part of what I'm about to share with you with my own personal story. I proudly come from a long line of strong, resilient, fierce and capable First Nations men and women. My grandmother was a proud mother of 9 who raised her children on her own after my grandfather passed away. My mum was only 9 years old when he passed. My grandfather, Edward Moran, has a personal story that, as a family, we've only known the true depths of over the past few years. He was always a proud blackfellow. He was a strong man. He was a local farmer. He worked really hard for the local white farmers. He was very well respected by the local non-Indigenous community, so much so that after he passed away, it was his reputation with the authorities that allowed my grandmother to take herself and her children off the island and be granted a house to live in Ballina. A single black mother with 9 children, it was almost unheard of to be allowed to live in the town with the others, rather than on the island mission. He was a hard worker and worked any job and made the most of any opportunity to provide for his family. He was a big boy. He was the New South Wales State Heavyweight Boxing Champion, travelling around with the tent boxes, winning fights to put food on the table, and might I add, my nan, she never went to watch him because she was so afraid of what would happen. Sadly though, he had a trauma story that he carried with him his whole life until the day he died. In fact, he had a trauma number, and that number was 701. That was the number that was registered to him by the Aboriginal Protection Board when they had taken him from his mother and father, my grandparents, to the Kinchilla Boys' Home. He was just 9 years old when he was sent to the home in 1927. He spent 3 years in the home, and then at just age 12, he was sent all the way out to Angleville, Western New South Wales, to work on a station, and we all know that at such a young age, he wasn't working, he was committed to slave labour. It would be 10 long years before he returned back to his parents, back to his home on Cabbage Tree Island. He was 19 years old. He left that island a young boy, and he returned a broken, traumatised young man. The highest level of formal education he received was grade 3. My stepdaughter is in grade 4. My mother tells me of the only memory she has left of him when he would walk across the cane fields after they'd burned them off, covered in the soot and the embers, as you can imagine, big boy, and he had the big cane-cutting machete knife slumped over his shoulders. I remember my grandmother telling us that he was a very strict man, and I can understand why, always wanting to present the family respectfully to the public, always wanting better for himself and his family, always well-dressed, well-mannered, and had an incredible work ethic which I strongly feel was passed down to my mother and her siblings. My mother raised my sister and I as a single parent and dedicated her life to caring for and protecting our women in community and providing all the love and support that she could within her own strength and courage as a woman, navigating the challenges of being a single black mother. This year, as we celebrated the 50th year of the Aboriginal Tent Embassy, I also celebrated my mother, who was there on that day in 1972, leading that march. And if you see any of the photos, she's a woman with a big afro and this deadly trench coat that I wish she kept for me because I reckon I could have made that work myself. She was there fighting to free Black Australia, fighting for the voices of our people to be heard. My mother worked tirelessly over the past 30 years in Aboriginal mental health, child sexual assault, domestic and family violence, and was so relentless in her efforts to provide safe spaces for our women and our children, so much so that she had to retire twice. There were times growing up when we had no money, but we still had a roof over our head. She didn't know how she'd put food on the table, but was surrounded by so much love and support by her family, friends, and the community that she always made it happen. My father was a white man who grew up in the eastern suburbs of Sydney here, surfing and playing rugby league. He played professional rugby league for a bit with his two brothers. However, he was the brother that would drink himself to daylight and then run on the field and score all the tries. He was always the life of the party, and for the most part of my life, I believed that perhaps this is why he was so absent in my life. He was a stranger to me, and the few times that I did see him growing up, I can only remember him being so intoxicated that the one time he actually mistook my friend for me, his own daughter. My mother told me one day when I was a curious teenager and asked why he was so absent that he simply did not want to be a father, and as you can imagine, that completely broke me. For years and years, I was so angry, though I never spoke of it or showed it, and I chose to celebrate being raised by a single mother instead of hoping one day he would turn up. Almost 10 years ago, I got a phone call saying that he was dying, that he had hours to live. I didn't know this man, but the funny thing is that I automatically, emotionally and mentally fell into this daughter role. I spoke with the doctors and questioned the nurses and even considered making the emergency trip to see him take his last breath. But as you can imagine, I just couldn't. He passed away knowing that I was on the phone, and for what that was worth, to this day, I hope that he passed in true peace. A few years ago, after connecting with my father's family, now you can imagine a Koori girl connecting with her whitefellow family. We hear all these stories about whitefellas growing up connecting with their blackfella family after so long. So it was really strange to me to hear from these mob or, my family that I found it really hard to navigate at first. What if they don't like my big mouth? What if they don't laugh at my jokes? I learned so much about my father, and I learned that he had a horrible childhood and that I then had to do some healing within my relationship with him, though he was no longer on this earth. I knew that I had to sit with his story, with his trauma story, and understand how that contributed to him being absent in my life. And I learned that my father was a victim of sexual abuse by the Catholic school as a young boy. I learned that the abuse was so severe that he would hide underneath the house most days instead of going to school. And I learned that his father, my grandfather, because of his demons too, that he basically flogged him because he wouldn't go to school and had no idea what was happening. And obviously this affected my grandfather's ability to be that loving, safe space for my father and his trauma. I learned that my father's trauma was so heavy that he could not comprehend the responsibility or ability to be a father, and chose not to let my sister and I be associated with his pain. Over the years, I've done the work for myself to understand and to be at peace with that understanding, and now I celebrate the spirit that I know that he had growing up as a young man and as a man in his final days, the larrikin, the funny guy, which is maybe where I get some of my jokes from, the gypsy traveller, and certainly the storyteller, which is why I get my biggest mob yarns from too. I will always wonder what he would have thought of me now, or what he would have said when I was 14 years old and I came home one day and told my mother I wanted to quit school, because I felt the school environment didn't serve me as a young Aboriginal person who knew deep inside that I learned differently. She only gave me two options, and if anybody ever gets to meet my mother, I won't tell you all the little things that she said in between. Stay in school or get a job. So there was no way that she was about to let me be the same scars of our people for centuries. No education, no job, no life, nothing more than what was determined for us by settlers over 200 years ago since colonisation. So I got a job as a trainee receptionist at the Koori Mail, and let me tell you, I was changing toilet rolls and licking stamps and babysitting the boss's kids and doing all the stuff nobody wants to do. I left school mid-grade 10. I walked into what I'd hoped would be the best education for me. 2, I had to trust that the same work ethic from generations past really was in my DNA, and make sure that I made the most of every opportunity that came my way since. I spent 10 years working for the Koori Mail, and in 2008, so if you do your maths, I've got a very big birthday coming up this December. Starts with a 4 and ends with a 0. I decided to explore opportunities in Indigenous media, and had a great passion for mentoring and supporting our Indigenous youth in school. Not to tell them to quit school like I did, but that their education and career pathways were important, particularly those who perhaps face the same kind of crossroads as I did as a student, and certainly to encourage them that they just need to have a plan. In 2016, things certainly came full circle for me, and I was offered the role of the General Manager of the Koori Mail, and for the first time in a long time, I found myself doubting myself, wondering if I was ready or deserving of this opportunity. I felt like I was too young. I deliberated for weeks until ultimately I absolutely had to remember who that 14-year-old girl was back then, the one that knew it all and wanted to quit school, and she was a bit of a big noter and, thought that she could make her own decisions. Her confidence, her ability to take an opportunity and run with it, and that this was just another opportunity that I had to trust that I was the right person for the role. And I strongly feel that the challenges and obstacles of the role between then and certainly this year has prepared me for what would become one of the most challenging times our region has seen with the Lismore floods. As most of you all know, the Koori Mail was severely impacted, just like all the other businesses in the CBD, including our Indigenous organisations. And although it's almost 8 months ago, I still can't believe that our community are still in desperate need of support. For the past 8 months, we've provided support to the flood-affected communities of our region and made a commitment to help our region recover as best as we can, despite being impacted as a business and newspaper ourselves. And, the most beautiful part about this is seeing what we've been able to achieve because of the strength in the local communities who have stood by our side since the flood. Strength in numbers and strength in our connections. Local people from our communities. And look, the previous panel, I listened to every single word and agreed with every person that spoke, that it truly is about our local people from our communities stepping up and taking the lead. With people from around the region, neighbouring communities, and certainly around the nation, we've been able to support the efforts of the Koori Mail being able to provide the care that our flood-affected communities need. We took action when it was called for immediately, just like a number of other community organisations in our area. As a newspaper, we couldn't operate for some weeks after the flood, so we quickly turned our efforts to helping our community recover. We set up a food and supply bank at our devastated building and used our networks and connections as a nationally recognised Indigenous organisation to call out for support. And I remember the day that the flood hit, I drafted a text message that was a novel long and spammed my entire contacts list. It could have been the postman, I don't know. But I reached out to everybody that I could in that list. I was going to say it could have been an ex-boyfriend, but I shouldn't say that. Probably was. To make sure that they had started to hear our voices of our community. We were completely overwhelmed with the amazing, generous support that came in donations, whether it was food and water, clothing and other much needed supplies. So we quickly strategised on how to best coordinate flood relief. Not our day job, never done it before. We're a newspaper. And this was led by our local Bundjalung mob. By the time it took another organisation in the area to set up a database and put a call out for people to register online to volunteer, we'd already spent that 6 days covering hundreds and hundreds of homes because we took it back to our old ways of learning. We talk about those days drawing in the sand. We had a notebook. It was a little red notebook and then it turned into a blue notebook. But we had a notebook and then we had a whiteboard. But we didn't have a database. We used the resources that we had because that's what we do best. We didn't have, access to the technologies. We didn't have access to registrations and spreadsheets, but what we had access to was our local knowledge and our local communities. We used traditional ways of thinking and coordinating action. And this was absolutely reliant on our ability to listen deeply. Every single day, we listened to those local voices. Those who were impacted and needed to be heard, and every day we worked down the line for the needs of the community. So we started out with food and clothing, then we put a call out for camping gear and tools, cleaning supplies. We put a call out for electrical equipment like generators and gas supplies for temporary cooking and heating. And all of this information came directly for those who were impacted, because who are we to determine what it looked like to care for people that have just experienced the most traumatic time of their lives? We established a makeshift medical centre on site where volunteer GPs and practitioners could triage. They provided prescriptions and referred anyone who was at risk emotionally or mentally to our volunteer counsellors, who we also organised to set up on site. We had a wellbeing tent providing bodywork and massage therapies for weeks and months. This was about a holistic view of what it looks like to care for people when they're in a time of crisis. Our elderly women were on the ground establishing an op shop, which is still running today, and our local mob were the ones in helicopters doing food and supply drops to our Indigenous communities within a 2 to 3 hour radius in the height of a flood event. We've raised over $1.3 million for our Bundjalung communities affected by the floods, which has allowed us to independently self-determine what the care, relief and recovery looks like for our people. As Michelle said earlier, we've only been doing it for 60,000 years. We've been able to give individual grants to families and provide large funding amounts to our Indigenous organisations locally and the surrounding regions to provide that continued care and relief for our people, because we acknowledge that we can't do it all, but we also acknowledge and trust that our own Indigenous organisations too know how to best provide care and support our people in a time of crisis. Our local mob have advocated, shouted from the rooftops, calling out the government on their severe lack of support and inability to live in the real world, to live in the reality of what has happened. That these are the voices that I am most grateful for. It is evident that the rescue, relief and recovery efforts have been supported by the community because we listened. And at times, we may not have had the answers. I don't even know how to turn a generator on. But we listened. The many hubs and centres, volunteers and community members have saved people's lives and have contributed to their ability to recover. This is so true. And this means that it's clearly evident that the community has been doing the jobs of our state and federal leaders, largely without funding. It continues to blow my mind that decades and decades after this region experienced flood disasters, the leaders responsible for serving our communities are still scratching their heads over the same ideas and strategies that keep putting our communities in vulnerable positions when natural disasters occur. This leadership, groups of people who are so ignorant to the knowledge of our local people experiencing firsthand the effects of their arrogant quest for power and control, has been shown up by those on the ground, deep in the mud and debris and deep in the reality. This leadership today in 2022 is so reminiscent of a system of leadership that has been structured on the origins of the idea that colonial hierarchy and title are inferior. And in the case of recent floods, the colonial hierarchy and title are inferior to local knowledge and local Indigenous knowledge. I cannot comprehend how such leadership is so lacking in the ability to just listen. But then again, as a First Nations woman with a microphone, I can't help but be reminded of the past 234 years. That hierarchy and title are so grossly and deeply rooted into the soil of this nation. It is literally clogging up our waterways and drains with its filth, drowning out our towns and its people. They say leadership is determined by those who follow. I've always believed that leadership is determined by your willingness to listen. Some 8 months later, I'm still yet to understand why it is so hard to listen, that listening is the first steps to doing the work, and that by listening to our local people, it is vital to supporting our communities. We want to see our communities strong. We want our communities to feel like their voices are being heard. And as an Indigenous woman with a voice, I am unapologetically loud for my people. I am outspoken. I'm not quiet. I have experienced bullying. There have been attempts to intimidate me into being a watered-down version of an Aboriginal woman, attempts to silence me, to silence my wanting to listen. There have been attempts to make me feel inferior, make me feel that I don't have a place or a seat around a table as an Aboriginal woman. But here I am, again, unapologetically present in my story with you all today, equal in my presence with you all, no greater than anyone else breathing and walking on the same path toward doing all that we possibly can to protect our communities. To protect our river systems and our lands, protect our culture, our languages, our traditions, our songlines and our stories, to protect our children, our babies, to honour our ancestors and fight for the future of our generations to come. And this includes all of us, all of our voices, all of our communities, and we have so much more to do. And we're tired. We are so tired. And the work isn't easy. And you're nodding your heads because I know that you are feeling it just as much as myself and many, many others are. Over the past 8 months, every time someone has asked me if I'm okay or, oh my gosh, how do you do it? And I can't say mojitos. I'm lucky I'm not a smoker. I strongly believe that listening and being reminded of the incredible examples of the strong and resilient people in our own lives, in my life, in my community, that continue to show us the way is certainly how we keep going and is certainly how we keep doing the most to support our communities. It is also about standing strong in your work, standing strong in your connectedness with each other, and standing strong in your willingness to listen deeply within your sector. I am only an email away. I'm only a connection on LinkedIn, and sometimes I'll put out the odd tweet. So staying connected is so important to how we see ourselves in the work that we do and the support that we surround ourselves with, and that we keep working together. And that it absolutely is about standing strong in your own voice. If you are so confident and true in your own voice, then you absolutely can do the work to support the voices of our people and our communities. Thank you for having me here today.